Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the 4th Tree Advisory Board Ad Hoc Committee discussion. I think today we're going to be sharing code evaluation and issues and options. So probably a little bit more discussion based than we've been in the last few meetings. For the first thing we need to start with is, would someone please be willing to set a motion that we accept the minutes from our last meeting?
Chair, do we want to take roll first?
Yes.
Oh, okay, roll first, sorry.
Would you like me to read the names?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. Alan Billingsley.
I'm here in Long Beach on vacation, but I made it.
Thank you. John Boatman.
I'm here and happy to trade places with Alan if you'd like.
Ed Brooks. Do we have Ed? Not right now. Tico Maradon.
Here.
John Ellers.
Present.
Jesse Gamble.
Here.
Micah Glassstetter.
Present.
Chair Jackson. Hank Jones.
Hello, everyone. I'm here.
Sean Martin. I think that's who was joining us later, right? Maya Neff.
Here.
Jesse Black. And Denise Nicole Franklin.
Present.
Thank you.
Chair, you do have quorum.
All right, I won't jump ahead of myself next time. Are there any corrections to the minutes from last week? You've got a chance to review them. And if not, would someone move that we accept those minutes?
So moved.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Great, thank you. If there's no corrections, the minutes stand approved. And then our next topic is our code evaluation options. And it looks like Alex, Chris, and Lisa will be walking us through that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. I will be sharing my screen now. Okay, let me know if you can see that.
Yes, we
Yes.
can see
Good.
it. Yep.
We can see it.
All right, thank you. Okay, everyone. Hello, Alex Hancock here with Planet Geo. Good to see you all again. Thank you for your time commitments on this. This has been a great process so far, and we're looking forward to today's discussion. So I think it'll be a good conversation, but we're gonna get started so that we can keep things moving. So today, just to give you an overview, we're going to first go over just a general overview of what we've reviewed in the past 2 meetings. Then we'll review exemptions, enforcement, and incentives, and then talk about next steps. So these are going to be some deep dives into some pretty in-depth pieces of the code. So first, just to go over, we did go over a lot in our past 2 meetings. So just to give you a refresher, we covered what isn't urban forest. We covered tree canopy assessments generally and how we can use them. And then we covered Lakewood's canopy, and then how to set goals using that canopy data. And then in the last meeting, we discussed the tree code review and the input that we got from city staff, and covered some of the general community concerns that we wanted to incorporate, and then some recommendations to consider. So today, our meeting is really for you, the committee members, to have discussion. And we won't be doing any Menti meters today. We're really going to be focused on talking. So first, just want you to keep in mind these questions as we're going through the slides today. How can we integrate Lakewood's tree canopy goals into the code? What updates are needed to the tree preservation code? And what innovative ideas can we bring forward to really make Lakewood's code better? And so just keep these questions in mind during the presentation today, but also as you're making recommendations in your report and working as a committee. And Lisa will be talking more about that report after this presentation. So we'll have more time to talk about that afterwards. So as part of this overview, I just wanted to zoom out quickly to highlight the many variables that are included in municipal urban forestry. Setting a policy is one piece of the puzzle, and it can really impact everything else that you see on this slide. So it's important to recognize that in Lakewood, the city has defined and accomplished some of these things, but some of these actions are in process that we're working on right now, and some of the actions are not yet happening. And I think that, you know, could be due to limited resources and just, you know, the fact that we're working on the policy now, there's going to be more coming afterwards. So happy to come back and talk about some of these later, but just important for you to keep in mind the full context of what we're doing here. So first we'll talk about exemptions, and we're gonna try to do this part in about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll have discussion at the end of this section. So want to give you a quick overview. There are 5 main exemptions in the tree preservation code, and the first 3 are location based. So if we're trying to really get a high level overview of these exemptions, the first 3 are really based on where the trees are located. So the first one is single family residential lots under 17,000 square feet. The second one is industrial zoning districts. The third is easements and right-of-way. And that exemption applies to public agencies and utilities. And then the next 2 exemptions are based on the characteristics or conditions of the tree. So this has to do with emergency removal for trees that are a public safety hazard. And then the last one and final one, which we're going to talk in more depth about, is for trees that are not designated as significant trees. So just throughout the course of this presentation, just keep in mind what you think the intent of these exemptions is, and then which exemptions do you think the city of Lakewood should keep. So we're going to first talk about the single family residential lots under 17,000 square feet. Highlighted on this map on the right here, those are only the single family residential zoning districts. So you can see that we have R1 in pink, R2 in blue, R3 in purple, and R4 in orange. So just want to read this exemption quickly. Lots of less than 17,000 square feet in single family residential zoning districts are exempt from this chapter, except where specific tree preservation is required as a mitigation measure under SEPA. In the event that a permit is not required for the establishment of a use, the standards of this section shall not apply. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what the impact of this is on the city. And so just to bring this back to the tree canopy data that we reviewed a few meetings ago, these single family zoning districts, when you bring them together, they make up, they contain 59% of the citywide tree canopy. And you can see that in the R3 zoning district, that's 31.2% of the tree canopy in the city. And so that's the purple on the map there. So just something to keep in mind as we're thinking about exemptions here. So you can see if I toggle between these 2 slides, the difference between this map on the right that includes all of the single family residential zoning lots. And then when I switch to the next slide, these are only the lots that are under 17,000 square feet. So that's what we're talking about now. So if it's missing, if the lots are missing from this map, it means that the tree preservation regulations apply to those lots. So as we're looking at this chart, there's a lot of numbers on it, but what I want you to look at in the first chart, the average lot size in the first column there, you can see that R1 has larger lots. They're bigger properties. And then it goes down to R4 with smaller properties. So when you go down to the end of the columns there, it shows that the percentage of the lots that are under 17,000 square feet within each zoning district also increases as you go down to R4. So in total, these single family residential lots that are under 17,000 square feet, those are 82% of all single family residential zoning lots. So all that to say, most of the lots that are single family are under 17,000 square feet. And then, so that sort of gives you the story of how many properties this impacts. But then when we're looking at the actual area in the city, that's the bottom chart here, you can see that the total is that of all single family residential area throughout the city, 58% of that area is exempted from the tree preservation code because it's within lots that are under 17,000 square feet. So I hope that made sense. It's a lot of numbers to cover, but it gives you an idea of the impact of the exemption as it stands today. So, and watch the map as I toggle to the next slide. This is just a demonstration. It just shows a scenario of those lots that are under 10,000 square feet, as opposed to looking at it as 17,000 square feet. So you can see that there are a lot of properties within that gap of the 17,000 to the 10,000 square feet. And if we were to, just as a scenario, cut that down to a 10,000 square foot lot exemption, then we would end up with just 42% of the properties exempted from the code. So that means that more than half of the single family properties would be subject to the regulations. And then as we're looking at the area, again, that brings it to just 23% of the area would be exempted. So about 77% of the single family area would be protected. So I know that was a lot of information, but it just kind of gives you an idea of the impact of the code as it is, if we were to reduce it, what it would look like. And then just keep in mind, what is that exemption? What is the intent behind it? And what is the impact that it's having? And is that the intent that you want the code to have? Is a single family residential exemption appropriate? So
Alex,
as we,
before you go on, I think Courtney has her hand up.
oh, sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Alex. I do want to also make note for other single family residential lots that are over 17,000 square feet. We do also allow tree removal without a permit. So 1 to 4 trees can be removed per year, depending on lot size. So the larger the lot, the more trees can be removed per year, which is itself is also kind of an exemption. So just to be fully transparent with the committee.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So, and we will revisit this again, but to talk just about the exemptions generally. So that was the first exemption. And then the second exemption is industrial zoned properties. So these areas are highlighted on the map here. And specifically, the code says that industrially zoned properties are exempt from this chapter, except where specific tree preservation is required as a mitigation measure under SEPA. So, the fact that industrial zoning is called out isn't very clear as to why industrial as opposed to commercial. I think that it may have been something that was brought over from older code versions, but it's worth reassessing at this point. And also, I didn't include it on this slide, but I just wanted to note that industrial areas contain 3.2% of Lakewood's tree canopy. And then for the third exemption, we have easements and right-of-way. And this exemption reads, tree removal by a public agency or a franchised utility within a public right-of-way or upon an easement for the purpose of installing and maintaining utilities, essentially, and streets and pathways, that they are exempt from this chapter. And notification to the city by the public agency or franchised utility is required prior to the tree maintenance or removal. So this type of exemption is common throughout cities because the fact of the matter is that the power grid and other utilities are an important part of public health and safety. And it is, in a scenario where a utility needs to maintain the power lines, they need to be able to come in and do the work that they need to do safely. And I think, the piece that says that the notification to the city is required is great. Whether or not that is happening is a different issue. So I think there's, certain parts of the code are great that they're in there, but we have to make sure that the enforcement of that is successful as well. So not uncommon to see this in codes. And again, this is another common exemption, but as we're looking at how this is enforced, is important as well. So our fourth exemption here is for emergency removal, and that reads that any number of hazardous, protected and non-protected trees may be removed under emergency conditions, and these have to do with natural disasters and storms. Emergency conditions include immediate danger to life or dwellings or similar stationary and valuable property, including the presence of a target. And so that does get to some best management practices within arboriculture that in order for a risk to exist, there has to be a target. And so we see that emergency removal may occur and with these following conditions. And, I think this looks really great because emergency removal is common among many cities, but the process that the city has set up in order to allow for emergency removal is very important. And this looks like a very good process here, but again, it's about how is this enforced? Is this effective the way that it's set up? And, I think having the ability for emergency removal is important, but I think it is, I'm sorry, I just saw that Tikomer has his hand up. Yes.
I just wanted to point out for the industrial exemptions, I believe that industrial properties were only given exemption 2 years ago for when Springbrook was rezoned. So I think it's a recent thing, the industrial exemptions.
Okay. Courtney, do you have some feedback on that?
That's correct. He's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think that's something that we should discuss, and that has to do with some context that's of current events that are happening in the city. So it is definitely worth discussing, and yeah, I think we'll come back to that because I think that's something that we should decide as a committee. Does it make sense? And at this point, we're going to get to the fifth exemption here. So trees not designated as significant. So the removal of non-significant trees that are not protected by any other means is exempt from this chapter. This is important for us to discuss. So just to break this down, what is defined as a significant tree according to the code is a 9-inch diameter breast height, DBH, for evergreen trees and deciduous trees, and then 6 inches for Gary oak trees. And then regardless of the tree diameter, it is determined to be significant by the director due to uniqueness of the species or provision of the important wildlife habitat. So these conditions here that are set up for what is a significant tree are, it's a good start. And I think that, it's very broad the way that it's set up. So I think the way that the code is working right now is that a lot of the exemptions sort of define what is protected or not protected more so than what this definition of significant is setting up for us here. So also just within this code section, within this exemption, it also defines what isn't a significant tree. And that is can be defined as the damaged or diseased trees. And that is as determined in a report. And, that's by a landscape architect, certified nursery professional, or certified arborist. And then it needs to be approved by the city. So in theory, this is good on paper. And we just have to assess, is this effective in how it's being enforced? Can someone argue that it's damaged or diseased and not actually have a report to show for it, and then remove the tree and never have any interaction with the city at all? So this is almost like an exemption within this exemption here. So we see that this must not constitute an important wildlife habitat. So there is that disclaimer there. And also that these trees can remain standing if the owner chooses to, so long as they don't pose a threat to public safety. So I know I went through a lot of that very quickly, but I think this is a point where I wanted to pause and just open it up to the group to talk about the definition of significant tree, so that as we're looking at this section of the code, I think this definition specifically is really important to define because it's synonymous with protected tree. So this is where we want to open it up to you all. So you can raise your hands if you have thoughts on this. Should we include all species, exclude invasive species, give priority to certain native species, and so on. So it looks like we have Alan ready for.
Yeah, I'll go first because I live on 6 acres and I have broadleaf maples that grow like weeds that will be significant trees in literally 48 months under the code. And I have Gary oaks that I personally planted that are now 10 or 12 years old that are 6 feet tall is all, and now designated not significant trees. So I think species identification becomes very, very important. And in the core of that has to be the replacement time that a breed of trees, a species takes to actually become canopy and cover again.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Okay, Maya?
Yeah, I do agree with Alan on the certain trees are definitely going to hit that diameter a lot faster. And I do definitely think that excluding invasive species is a very, very good idea because they will come through and outcompete basically anything else. Luckily, Western Washington doesn't have a lot of invasive species that are trees, but identifying those and making sure those are excluded as far as significant trees would be a really, really good idea.
Great, thank you. Tikamar.
I kind of just want to agree with what was said, but like comparing like Gary Oaks and like Douglas firs, for example, I think if you compared the age for a Douglas fir that's 9 inches and a Gary oak that's 6 inches, I think that Gary oak is going to be a lot older than the Douglas fir. And if you look at the population of Gary oaks, there are very few young Gary oaks. So it could be argued that any Gary oak, even if it's only a couple inches thick, should be considered a significant tree, because even a Gary oak that's a couple inches thick is potentially going to be decades old. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that is really helpful to the discussion. And I think that's where you'll see that some municipalities set certain additional protection standards for trees when they reach a certain size. And so even though, a 6-inch Gary oak right now is protected, like some codes, once they reach 30 inches, become a grand tree, or they have an additional level of protection on top of the regular protection standards. So, that would be something where if you were to include all, say you bring that down to 3 inches, I'm just throwing that out there, 3 inches, all Gary oaks are protected and require a permit, then what size may you want to consider an additional level of protection for Gary oaks once they reach a certain size? Okay, we have Jesse.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur with what had been said before about not including invasive species. And I was also curious where the 6-inch threshold came from, Gary oaks. Is that like industry standard? Is that what other jurisdictions do? Or is that just a number that was chosen? I was curious as how that was arrived at.
Courtney, do you happen to know where that number came from?
I want to say that is directly from WDFW's guidelines, but let me do a quick cross check before I guarantee that. But I believe that's in that sense an industry standard, but I could be mistaken. Put a pin in that and I'll look it up really quick.
Thanks.
If
Okay,
that's the
and
case, then I would just say consistency with what Fish and Wildlife is doing, or WDFW is doing.
okay. Melissa.
Yes, I definitely agree with the idea of decreasing the restriction for the Gary oaks. In other words, making it less than 6 inches, because they do take such a long time to grow. And I also think that a protection for some of trees, that maybe we could call them heritage trees. There are some beautiful older non-native trees and a few natives here in Lakewood that have been removed in recent years. I think that there should be some protections for some of these much older trees that are here, but maybe not native. See if I can think of an example. There used to be a monkey tree, for example, off of Silicon Boulevard across from H&O Produce. There used to be a beautiful tree across from what is now CHI Franciscan on the corner of Gravy Lake Drive. There used to be a weeping tree at the corner of the Columbia Bank building. That tree was over 100 years old. So those types of trees, I feel, should also have some protections.
Okay, great, thank you. Sean.
I guess I'm wondering about this term significant trees, because
Excuse me.
tree, did you say?
I'm sorry, I did say Sean,
Oh,
but we can come to you next.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
Alex, so significant tree, can you circle back? I think it was one slide back. What were the exemptions for significant trees? I just was curious about that. What factors or other situations might come in where a significant tree could be removed, or is it just all or nothing? It's either significant or if not.
Yeah, so even with significant trees, this part of the code identifies that a significant tree would require a permit in order to be removed. And so even a significant tree can be removed, but it would just need to meet certain criteria in order to be removed. So in this case, a tree that is not significant would be a damaged or diseased tree. And so that, that does refer to safety hazards. And, if a tree is damaged or diseased, things like that important to take into account. But I think the major part of this that you want to pay attention to is that it's supposed to be determined in a report. And I don't believe that there's a good process for that report to be reviewed in advance by the city. And so that sort of, it makes this part of the code less effective because there's not any way for the city to know in advance that a report has been made to determine that this tree is damaged or diseased and therefore not significant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking also just beyond that, I was just curious about, risk to persons or property, or if it's encroaching, as foundation issues, a lot of stuff beyond whether the tree itself is damaged or diseased. There could be a lot of things that tree is impacting that, I would expect would be incorporated in there, but I guess I'm not seeing that. I had a question about that.
Sure. No, it's a good question. Some municipalities do outline very specifically, if it's within a certain distance of a structure, and therefore if it is, or if they can prove with an engineering report that it's actually causing damage to the house, the structure, or some utilities or things like that. That I haven't seen that in this code, but yeah, so there are ways to still justify removal of significant trees. But yeah, we don't see the specifics outlined in the code.
Okay. I mean, I would just advocate for that maybe to be considered. I could just give you a personal testimony about a tree that's blowing up a sidewalk 5 years after it blew it up previously, and, continually having to pave around. So I see situations like that potentially coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are best management practices for conflicts with sidewalks and pavement as well. So happy to provide some resources on that too. Courtney, I just want to have you jump back in here and provide some.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
I just wanted to circle back and respond to Jesse's question. So I don't see the 6-inch standard as coming from the priority habitats and species standards. My best guess is that we borrowed that from Pierce County when we originally incorporated. What WDFW does mention is tree canopy stands and individual oaks that are larger than 20 inches, or medium oaks, which are 12 inches. It doesn't necessarily define small oaks. So I don't know where that 6 inches came from, but I will do a little more research in the next week and try to put together some information for our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I had previously called on Sean, and Jean had some input. Do you want to jump in now?
Well, I guess I'm just curious about how significant trees. There are many trees that are significant out there, and I guess that's quite the word, because they're all significant for something. Maybe we don't necessarily see or understand that value, but it grew, it has determination, and it's adding to something for something. And I guess I was just troubled about significant. Is that the best word to describe whether or not it should stay or go? The term.
Sure. Yeah. And it is synonymous with protected at this point. So it would be even to consider that word instead. There are many different words that we could use in place of that. But I think these definitions are important because once you select a word, then to have a very specific definition is important.
Well, that impacts me somehow. I'm not sure, but I just thought all these trees have the drive. They're all surviving. Someone mentioned the monkey puzzle tree. We had one at one time, but they're rather peculiar. They tend to not enjoy having other trees around. I find we when they last, it's because they seem to be not in a setting that's going to have too close to it another tree. It likes open space, and I would just hate to think that those trees are not significant, but it almost sounds as though that's what it is. But to me, it's pretty clear. If it's a snag, if it's a tree that's going to bring harm potentially, then that makes it not significant at all. That's the only thing that I can see. I don't see that we're looking at specific types of trees and determining whether or not they're significant.
Right, right. So yeah, the approach that the code is taking is a lot more about location of the tree than it is getting into a lot of the detail about the condition or the characteristics of the tree. So yes. Okay, Ticomar.
I just want to point out that the exemptions, like, so for even above 17,000 square feet, I think Courtney mentioned that like you can cut down 1 to 4 trees without a permit per year. And also the question is like, how difficult is it to get a permit? So there should probably be like, I think Melissa mentioned like heritage trees. So there probably should be some trees that it's not possible to get a permit for, because even if there are protections, like if it's very easy, if it's trivial to get a permit, then it's not really that meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think even just setting up a process for denial of a permit is something that can be done. I think, you know, the idea is that, you know, that might be understood, but you could define that and just make sure to call that out. Yep, Melissa.
I really loved what Sean had to say about all trees having a purpose. But I also think that it's going to be very important that we have some things in place about who is making this judgment call. I don't know if a landscape architect or a nursery professional would be as qualified as, say, an arborist to determine whether or not a tree is healthy or not healthy. Is it an issue of you just don't want pine needles on your roof, or needles on your roof, or is it really an issue of the tree's safety? I think we need to have some very good protections in place, that we have a non-biased, non-partisan person, possibly an arborist on retainer with the city, who can actually go out and give a non-biased professional opinion on the health of a tree before they're given the option to be labeled as damaged or diseased.
Yeah, thank you. I always like to recommend that people visit the ISA website to find a local arborist, because that's where you know, those arborists are certified and they have to maintain their credentials. I also know some landscape architects who are absolutely qualified to do that, but there are some that won't even touch a tree inspection with a 10-foot pole. Like, they don't want anything to do with it. So it really does, it is a case-by-case basis, but as an ISA certified arborist, I like to always refer people to that website. So Maya.
Took me a second to unmute myself. Yeah, I would echo again. I would probably be considered a certified nursery professional at this point. I can call out when a tree isn't looking particularly good, but yeah, ISA certified arborists are going to be your best bet, because they have to have continuing credits. They're the ones who are watching disease prevalence in the area, and they know the things to look for. The upside with our area is that we do have the pathology department at the WSU Extension Center. So if you have questions, just even as a layperson about a tree, you can send samples their direction and just ask on your own before even starting these kinds of processes. But yeah, the narrowing down the scope as to who can write the report, or being fairly specific about the qualifications, I think would help ease the knowing who's doing the report, knowing how good the report is, and then knowing that the report is accurate, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think we'll take Ticomar's last comments, and then we'll go to the next slide where we're going to have more discussion just about all the exemptions.
I just want to mention, like, for example, if the property owner is like hiring the arborist, there's a potential for bias there. So,
well, in order for the arborist to maintain their credentials, there is they have to. I'm sorry, at a loss for words right now, but they have to comply with the code of ethics. And so if they ever go, against the code of ethics, and if they go outside the practice of what is good arboriculture, then they run the risk of losing their license. So, okay. So we are just going to step over to this recap slide and talk about all 5 exemptions together. And this is really a big conversation. Which exemptions should the city of Lakewood keep? Are there any exemptions that you'd like to see added? Do you think that these are effective the way they are set up right now? And we're not doing a Menti poll on this or anything. It's just open for discussion. So we discussed the significant tree, but want to open it up for discussion. And Courtney?
Thanks, Alex. Chair Jackson, I wanted to let you know that we have been joined this evening by Darren Masters from WDFW. So he just joined the call. I think tonight his intention is just to kind of listen, but he is also here as a resource if he is able to answer some questions. Darren, I encourage you, if you want to pop on your camera and give us a quick introduction, or if you have any comments or answers to some of the committee members' questions as we move through and we don't have the answer, feel free to raise your hand and give us the answer. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Courtney. So yeah, my name is Darren Masters. I'm the area habitat biologist for sort of the Nisqually River watershed and the Chambers Clover watershed, as well as Gig Harbor and the islands off of the coast there. And so my main role with land use is to review land use notifications and provide comments if needed on various types of land use plans. And so with that in mind, I would say that our role as DFW, you guys are familiar with the Growth Management Act. And the Growth Management Act requires local agencies to produce critical areas ordinances. And so because of that, DFW is also required to develop a priority habitats and species list. And so that's how DFW provides input on any kind of questions regarding priority habitats and species.
Thanks, Darren. We, again, really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to say that a lot of times you'll see in different codes, like throughout the country, if there is an agency that is tasked with staying up to date on certain aspects. So like Darren mentioned, they have species lists and they have specifications that they maintain. It is common to see local municipal codes refer to those agencies as, to make sure that the code remains current with whatever that agency is recommending. So just want to throw that out there to the group. Micah.
Yeah. So can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
You're breaking up a little
Ironically,
bit,
I'm
Mr.
out on-
Fostetter, and we can't see you. So I know that you've had to.
I'm a little nervous about turning on my video. I'm actually out on Anderson Island where the reception is not very good.
Okay.
Ironically, I'm heading out to a nature walk with some friends from out of town. But I did want to lend a couple pieces of perspective from local tree service. I myself love trees. I have planted many trees, native trees, oak trees on my property. And I have a piece of commercial property that I intend to plant Gary oaks on and other native species when we're given the permits to landscape it. But I've come up against the 17,000 square foot policy way too many times, where people will buy a piece of property and they find out they can cut down every tree on the property, and they choose to do so. Even when I'm trying to talk them out of it, They just close their ears, and I can tell they're gonna hacks per cut down the trees. So I find that to be the single biggest obstacle to preserving trees in the community. And if we're serious about protecting Gary Oaks, there should just be no lot size exemption. Even 10,000 square feet, that's 100 feet by 100 feet, which means still 80% of Oak Brook is exempt. And so there are just way too many lots with gorgeous, amazing oak trees and otherwise that are under that lot requirement. So my strongest recommendation is to have a uniform tree code for everybody. I do understand there are going to be exceptions, right-of-ways, whatever. The lot size one, it would be nice to get rid of that and then have something that is incentive-based, helps more people plant trees and incentivizes keeping trees and stops the indiscriminate, well, I'm just going to mow down every tree on my property because it was brought out. Some people don't like to rake leaves. Some people don't like to clean their guts. Get into some real situations.
We aren't having you come through, Mr. Glassner. I heard the majority of it. I think hopefully the rest of the committee did as well.
Okay.
I can hear
may
you
have
now.
been speaking, but if I can just reiterate the key point, I would really like to see the lot size exemption disappear. Not even be 10,000, not even be 6,000. In residential areas, and fairly to everyone, and significantly can't protect so many trees that exist on small home lots that can be trimmed into being very good neighbors and do not need to be removed. Did that make sense to everybody?
Yes, most of that came through. And just to summarize that, you would like to see that lot size exemption go away and have other protection standards in place.
And incentives.
And incentives, yes.
Yes, there's just been too many situations where the customer's eyes just glaze over if I'm trying to talk them into keeping a nice tree or a significant tree because they know they don't have to. And they're just going to hire a tree service to remove the tree because that's what they want.
Yeah, thank you for providing that insight. I think it's really valuable for the group. Okay, we'll move on to Sean.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I wanted to, speak to obviously emergency removal. I think makes sense. What the details are, maybe there's some discussion on some of those things. There's some more detail that needs to be sussed out, as I brought up. I would like to see personally, as a city, if the city's going to emphasize a new policy or we're changing policy for the homeowners and business owners in the city, that the city have skin in the game. So easements and right-of-ways to me makes sense to look at a little bit more. And then, to emphasize one of, I think Micah's points that he made, which is looking for incentives or kind of the win-win scenario. I would hope that this group is going to be creative in its thought and not just say all or nothing, but look at also what are ways that we can incent people to keep trees or businesses to keep tree, whatever it may be, whether it's giving more height for construction or one-to-one replacement, it's some kind of thing like that. It's just like to hear, and that's probably details that are still a little bit further down, but thinking about incentives is a good way to go as well.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll move down to Maya.
There we go. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with having the lot size exemptions is weird for Lakewood. At Lakewood Gardens, we're at such a large size that we basically are exempt from all of these things. And it has to be hard for tree service people too, to try and keep track of at what point it becomes a different set of exemptions at any point in time. And since a lot of tree services do services throughout several municipalities, having ours where it's a really complicated set of lot sizes, instead of just at the size of a tree, you would need a permit to remove it. These are your requirements for removing it, would simplify the process for tree service people as well as for owners, because if an owner wants to know whether or not they can cut down like what the process for looking up trees, they'd have to look up their lot size, and it gets a lot more complicated than it probably should be.
Thank you. Jesse.
Yeah, I mentioned last week, I believe, at our meeting, but I think a good policy or a good set of code to look at here, especially when it does come to single family residential lots, is federal waste trade code. I know that this is a tree preservation committee, but when there comes a time that it makes more sense, especially as you start to balance, the city, it's a collective, starts to balance its housing goals and infill goals, to find creative ways that even if you can't preserve, you can at least replant. Federal Way has really comprehensive replanting codes so that you can continue to ensure that tree canopy coverage will be still met. And I think that would be, I guess, a good first place to look if you start moving in a direction where you trying to, like I said, to compete those or juggle those sometimes competing goals about trying to increase infill development, but then at the same time preserve trees. See if there's a creative way to even offer replanting as a way to maintain tree coverage and incentivizing it, be the native trees or be Gary Oaks, what have you, possibly as a backup. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we do reference Federal Way in some of our enforcement discussion a little bit later in the discussion, but yes, I think getting creative is a great solution. Alan.
I'm somewhat surprised nobody said anything about the industrial zone, even though it's only 3% of the tree canopy, you say, but a blanket exemption for the simple fact that they're industrial zone in the entire city, I think is a little bit out of balance with really the goals of tree preservation, particularly when industrial zones get developed. It's very simple to mitigate at the very least with some canopy and parking areas and such too. And I think that's an overlooked area because the city really likes to have the industrial development. It brings in jobs and revenue and such too for the city. But I think there also need to be a partner in our canopy restoration.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this was some good discussion, and we are at 8:58 local time, so that would be 5:59 your time. So we should keep moving so that we can discuss some other parts of the code. And again, just if there are more discussion points throughout, don't hesitate to raise your hand, but we'll move on to enforcement for now. Just want to share some facts that throughout the industry, there are some standards to highlight here about what enforcement could look like and what Lakewood could be doing. So this is broken down in a very basic way. So first, to talk about permits. Permits really serve as a safeguard to make sure that the public is interfacing with the city on the front end. And when a community member needs to check in for a permit, they're more likely to operate within the city's regulations. So cities can charge a variety of different types of permit fees. And with some of those most common ones on the screen here, a permit application fee. And that really is essential for covering staff time. So if there's a city staffer that's going to be going out to inspect the trees and do a review and provide guidance to the property owner, then that time can add up. So that's one type of fee. And then permit fees, if the tree is permitted to be removed, some jurisdictions do charge an additional fee that would be directed to a city fund. And sometimes that's in conjunction with mitigation, which we'll get to soon. Then finally, after the fact permit fees or retroactive permit fees, this would, just like construction, if you do work without permits, it incurs a higher permit fee. And this would penalize the community member slightly, but not too severely if they are cooperative. So, oh, Courtney. Oh, did we lose you, Courtney?
No, I was just muted. Sorry.
Okay.
I wanted to make it clear that currently we do not have any of these fees. So tree removal permits are no cost, zero cost. And then we do have some mitigation if they are unable to plant on site. And even with retroactive, we allow voluntary compliance first. And so again, if they're able to replant on site, or if we find that they're meeting our exemption thresholds, then individuals would not have any fee for removing trees.
Thank you. So yeah, to talk about mitigation a little bit, often cities require for trees to be planted when trees are removed. And that can happen on site or off site, depending on how the code is structured. And then some cities also offer the option for in lieu of fees. And that allows the applicant, instead of planting trees, that they would pay fees into a fund, typically like a city fund for tree plantings that would help happen elsewhere throughout the city. But those specific parameters would need to be established on how that money would be spent. And finally, for fines and penalties, this is really the type of enforcement that comes into play when someone is unwilling to cooperate with the regulations that are set up. So fines issued when a protected tree is removed or damaged without a permit, a lot of times that can resolve the issue right away. But if the person is not being cooperative or just really unwilling to participate in the process, if there's construction happening on the property, a stop work order is often a successful way to get them to cooperate. A codes compliance case is often how these types of situations get reported. And that can be from, anyone, any citizen or community member who wants to report that, or it could happen from internally at the city. And then also a civil court case would be a route that takes it out of the city's hands and into the judicial system. And then sometimes extremely bad actors can be banned from doing business in the city, or if they have a business license in the city, having that license revoked, things like that. And just want to note that these fines and fees are often put into a fund that replenishes the urban forest. And so that might look like program resources. It might look like tree plantings or other environmental enhancement projects. And it's not included on the slide, but it is important to mention that some cities have options in place for individuals who are cooperative with the process, but unable to afford the fines and fees associated with tree removal. And, tree removal can be very expensive on its own. And so providing a process to assist low to moderate income families with the permit fees or any sort of fines incurred may be protected, but often these types of programs are offered maybe even through a different department, through a community service office, other parts of the city. So that would take coordination with other departments to make something like that happen. And Tico, Marie, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to mention with the fines that if if a property is being developed, there are obviously going to be benefits to the property owner from cutting down the tree, and if the fine is less than the monetary gain from cutting down the tree, then property owners might cut down trees knowing the fines and just reason that the fines are so little that they'll just pay the fines and do it anyway. So when figuring out what amount of money to set fines to, they have to be a price that is meaningful enough that people aren't just going to ignore restrictions on cutting down trees.
Yes, that's really important feedback. And we do see that it does need to be a finer fee that will have an impact if that's the goal. And some construction projects do, some developers do factor that cost into the cost of their work. And that's something that's, you know, at that point, it's out of the hands of the city, but you know, there are ways either through the stop work order or through other means of requiring plantings on site or off site that it needs to be mitigated in some way. John Boatman.
Has the city considered anything as far as having a fee for the permit? The reason I ask is that I think not having a fee for the permit for most of the work that needs to be done actually helps, because if people have like a substantial fine, or not fine, but a fee that they have to pay, I think people would have a tendency to remove trees and not say anything at all and hope that they don't get caught and then have a fee. But I think the city's permit application fee is pretty good. I didn't know if there was any thought that the city had. Maybe it's something for Courtney to answer about increasing that fee or anything else like that to help with the overall canopy goals and things like that.
Right now, I think that anything is on the table. So if there was a recommendation from this committee to the Planning Commission and the City Council to include some type of fee, that would definitely be considered. There is not separate from that been consideration for creating a new fee for tree removals. I will say that this is one of the only permits. The other one is a traffic mitigation fee estimate that we do not have any cost recovery for. And it does take quite a bit of staff time, even for simple ones, just to verify, you know, tree removal. And that is a no cost permit for any type of project. So single family residential, industrial development, commercial development, any and all is currently fee exempt.
Thank you. And yeah, just want to note that you know, any combination of these it doesn't need to be all or nothing. It's like you can come up with a kind of customized combination for what you think is appropriate. Denise.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest, if we do implement a permit fee, that we either also apply a waiver or a permit sliding scale fee, just to make it equitable for all incomes, for those who need it.
Thank you. Yeah. Micah.
I was going to say that does make sense. However, most people can afford to have tree work done, could afford a modest fee that helps the city recoup its costs.
Not necessarily. If some people have a tree that is dangerous to their, like a storm, by any means necessary, you're going to remove the tree out of necessity for protection of your home. And you may not be able to afford everything. So just putting that out there.
I think you're speaking of a situation where that would be an exemption anyhow. But when I say modest, I do mean modest. I don't mean anything that would be unaffordable.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Micah, did you have more to add there? Or is that?
No, I didn't. I mean, if we're going to talk about a round number, if someone wants to do any kind of significant tree work or removal, a couple $100 is, I start the bidding there and then let everybody prove me I'm wrong. But I think that's right in there with what most people could reasonably afford if there were a sliding scale for people who would have difficulty with that.
Sure. And well, just to add to that conversation, I think in situations where maybe there is a dangerous tree and there are, unfortunately, in many communities, predatory businesses out there who will take advantage of situations. And so if there's an elderly person who has been taken advantage of, there are certain times when even that $100 isn't really what they can afford. So just want to put that out there as, just another situation where it can be valuable. Jesse.
Yeah, no, I was, I think it just, as we were going through the fines and penalties, I thought I was looking at the mitigation point too. And it might be too early in the PowerPoint, but timing of mitigation replanting as well. I mean, I'm not sure how many plats Lakewood is doing, but even if Lakewood is, a redevelopment, remodel, what have you, if you were to time those trees towards the end of construction so that there's less chance for it to get damaged in the process, that could be a really good success measure for replanting. So.
Yeah, thank you. Melissa.
Yes, I agree with Micah and a few other folks that mentioned, John, that there be fees set up for these permits. That makes sense. And also that there's some teeth to the enforcement of the codes. I would recommend that the city, maybe the rest of the committee, take a look at what Seattle has created for their civil penalties for trees. If you're interested, it's civil penalty 25.09.460. One of the things that they put in this penalty is the willful and malicious cutting down of trees of people who know that it's illegal to cut down trees without permits. And I was thinking too, if we had this enforcement, these things that really would hurt if people cut the trees down illegally, that money then, Denise, to your point, could go to people who maybe they need a tree removed, maybe that tree fell in their yard and they need help clearing it. That money could be used in good ways as well.
Thank you. Lisa.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Just wanted to mention on the forthcoming slides, we do have sort of a range of the potential approaches to enforcement and fees that might present some options that kind of go along with what folks have been bringing up. So, for example, Seattle tripling the fee. I think, Melissa, we've noted that here as one idea. And I think to some of the other comments on fees or no fees, they're like Denise's point about ensuring fees are low to allow for people to comply. Some cities will have no cost permits, but you have to sign an affidavit that you're meeting the requirements. So it isn't a silent option in a way. You have to prove that you meet the exemptions and sign an affidavit in that, or standards rather, conditions. So there might be some in between options here.
Thank you, Lisa. And while I have you, how much time do we need to talk through the report at the end? Because we're at 6:14 now.
We probably only need a few minutes for that, but one option might be, and I pose this to the chair, it seems like enforcement is really important and we could complete the discussion on that. The incentives we may not get all the way through. One option might be to give a little homework and have each committee member send back some ideas that they have in mind, what's attractive about the incentives. Send that to Courtney and myself within a day's time to give us some feedback to help share with the next packet, just one idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
So I pose that to the chair, and if it makes sense to complete the enforcement discussion, because there's a few more slides and questions on that.
That makes sense to me, unless anyone is opposed.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we have Sean.
I just want to make a couple comments, I guess, on what some other folks have raised, some good points. point of clarification, I guess, on the Seattle thing, and the context of that really is with regards to environmental hazards or slopes, things like that. We had the background was basically someone clear cut or was taking trees down so they could have a view of the sound, and it was on a huge slope and it was a landslide risk. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there potentially are areas like that in Lakewood, but just clearly a higher danger or risk posed in that situation that merits that. Someone also mentioned about the fines, or maybe actually not the fines, the permit fees and whatnot, and those being a barrier to people complying potentially, and maybe they can get away with something that they otherwise would not try to. If the permit was set too high, I think there is absolutely merit to that should be considered. I would want to hear maybe more from what the city staff, I was told, or I guess we're all told, there's some time that goes into this. It's not just a rubber stamp thing when a permit comes in. So what are the actual resources that are involved in that to really have an educated understanding of if there is a move to set some kind of fee, that we have an educated guess on that, or good numbers, not just saying, well, it's 200 sounds good, let's call it a day. I don't know that that's the right way to go about doing the homework on it, to be honest. So those are just a couple thoughts I wanted to throw out.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Sean. We'll move on to Ed Brooks.
Yeah, I guess a different take on it from me. I think what we should do is actually not have a permit fee at all. And then I think the city should kind of announce that and let it be known that there is no permit fee for removal of trees. And the reason I say that is because it's a way for the city to actually be able to monitor it. In other words, the people are going to come in, they're going to get a permit, they're not going to recognize maybe what the mitigation fees are going to be. And it's a way for somebody just to raise their hand and say, I'm going to be doing this, so that the city can monitor it. If there's permit fees, maybe it's another way for people to might not want to comply with it. But I think just saying it's free, come out and just get one. And then they find out what issues are. At least the red flag has been raised potentially on what's happening on that parcel. And I think as a community as a whole, I think what we're trying to do is preserve the canopies, which I encourage. And in doing so, I think we need to look at what are if the penalties that, quite frankly, I don't think should be financial. I think they should be more along the lines of planting more trees in different areas, money into the fund or whatever. But I think that's probably the way to approach it in my book.
Thank you, Ed. Denise?
I was just going to say something along the lines of the fee. Maybe there's a percentage of that fine that goes into a pot. The pot could be like, if somebody can't afford their fee, or it doesn't even have to be if they can't afford it. It could be a scholarship fund for the future Maya Neffs of the world to become, a scholarship fund. Something that is going to keep this plan going and just make it sustainable and this is for longevity. I thought this was what the plan is. If there's a fine, like, how do we keep this growing and keep, just the youth involved? So if we're going to find people, let's build some resources in there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Maya?
I was going to point out for the permit fees, if people are trying to remove significant trees without a permit, which the protected trees, the larger trees, if they have hired an arborist company to do that removal, and that arborist company knows that there should be a permit involved in that, they very well could just refuse to take the tree down. So having permit fees and having the likelihood of people trying to get away with taking down a tree without a permit becomes fairly unlikely, as long as they are hiring out the tree removal itself, because the people who are actually doing the tree removal do want to know that they are covered and the property owner is covered with the permit if it is required.
Thank you. T. Kumar.
I just wanted to point out that it's kind of difficult to enforce things without like a tree inventory. So that would probably be a good thing to do, just to know what trees there are, and then it'd be easier to find out if somebody does take down a tree without a permit, because as it is, that might not be found out.
Yes. So just to speak to that a little bit, since tree inventorying is part of what we do at Planet Geo, typically our tree inventories are for public property, because that's how we can, just on a very basic level, like gain access to actually looking at the trees and inventorying them. So for a stem count and for counting how many trees there are, a lot of times that's happened, or that goes on just in the public right of ways and on public property. Private property inventories do happen, but it's a much longer process and it takes a lot more resources to make that happen. So just wanted to address that while it came up. And Courtney.
Alex, there is some GIS imaging options, right, that do provide a stem count. That am I correct in that? Or am I...
Yes, there are options to get that stem count, but it would tell us minimal information. So it's sort of like you have to pick which information you're going to get. If you're getting just stem counts, it would just tell you where trees are and not necessarily what type of tree they are.
Sure, and better than nothing, which is what we have more or less right now. And for the sake of talking about resources, perhaps at the next meeting, because I can't find that email, the city did explore an option for doing an inventory of private and public land. Do you by chance recall ballpark what that figure was in order for us to be able to complete that inventory?
I do not.
We can bring it back at the next meeting.
Yes, we can.
That's fine. It was several $100,000. So
yeah, the prices range from, I think, $375,000 to $480,000 or so for private. Now, we looked at doing an inventory of public trees, and there are a couple options, but I think like a $80,000 estimate was provided for just public trees. So you can see the difference. A lot of it is, getting permission, access. A lot more trees are on private property in general, and a couple other variables. But yeah, that's some estimates of the costs there.
And for that effort, the city was exploring some grant opportunities. There was one grant, but it was a pretty nominal amount. I want to say it was like $40,000. So that would cover a very small portion of that. There are other opportunities though. So again, I would not say that anything is off the table at this point. And if that's something that the committee says, this is an area or an avenue that we really need to pursue, maybe it's a phased approach where we look at it zone by zone, or area by area, and bite off little pieces, do GIS imaging. There's lots of ways to be creative with how we could get some type of data for a tree inventory.
Thank you. Lisa.
Just quickly, I think Jean is waving at us in the usual way.
Well, enforcement, I wonder, the idea of having an environment that we're living in, that we're enjoying, appreciating, and we're feeling safe in, for me, that would look like when I'm in the process of being on my own, quote, my own piece of land to do whatever I'm going to do. And I need to manage the trees in a way that's going to be productive, but beautify my project. I'm speaking at this time of individual homeowners, I think. I don't know about such a multitude of permits. I wonder really how effective that is in what we're doing. We're just getting more monies to do things. I was agreeing with Ed. I agreed with what he said. I thought that was a very wonderful opportunity to go forth, get the job done, and have opportunity for the I'm going to say program people to come out and take a look at the environment you're about to do, whatever you're going to do with the trees. But I hesitate to to get heavy with these sorts of things. People are in the process of spending a lot of money to build a home. They want to do what is right, but the bills continue to pile up, and to add another bill for trees when you have perhaps a lot of trees on your property and all you want to do is build your house, but make use of the trees, and you want it to be your project. I wonder how we can look at the benefit of making sure that that land owner, potential homeowner, is going to feel happy and want to move along with building his community because he feels as though things are going down in a good and fair and righteous way? Or is he going to feel put upon because they want you to have your own land, but you can't even choose the tree that you want? Or I don't know. I have some mixed feelings about that. But all in all, I was trying to acknowledge Ed because I thought he had a very clear way of presenting his point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, since I don't see any other hands up at this point, I think now might be a good point to hand it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about some next steps here. We weren't able to make it, we had some great discussion about enforcement, although we didn't get all the way through the slides. I think we really covered a lot of ground there. So we didn't cover incentives, but I think as Lisa proposed and the chair approved, that if you all can take a look at the incentives that we've provided in the PowerPoint, and then also if you have other ideas for incentives, you can email those to Lisa. Would those go to Courtney or to you?
If the members could send them to Courtney and myself, that's been our pattern.
Great. Yeah, so I think, you know, if we can say even just by Friday, if everyone can send your thoughts and feedback on the incentives specifically to Lisa and Courtney, that would be great. And then Lisa can
we have it till Monday morning.
Sure. I mean, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Lisa, you can talk a little bit about next steps with the report.
Yeah, maybe if you can stop sharing, I'll breeze through something pretty quick here.
Did that work?
Yes, thank you very much. Hopefully you're seeing the document that was in the packet. I wanted to mention this was a framework. After sort of going over the direction on the report that the committee would provide in the resolution and the operating principles, it's just basically an outline that would show that the report that you make could be organized around the key issues, such as what Alex went through. So here's an example that we covered last time about tree canopy goals. It would be set up so that there would be options identified, and then the committee can take each major issue on its own. And so for tonight, because we were going through exemptions, we can bring back, based on this discussion tonight, what were the options that were raised about residential exemptions. So for example, not having a 17,000 square foot minimum was one of the ideas. We can lay out the options to make it easier for the committee to discuss and eventually have your votes on the various key issues. So just wanted to mention this was an idea that we've used elsewhere to kind of organize the thinking around the major topics, to share the options that folks have raised, and bring that back for the eventual report and consensus votes. So I'd bring it back to the chair, see if that approach worked well from your perspective or others.
Does anyone have any feedback about using that approach to organize our thoughts?
That approach, it seems clean, it seems consistent and concise.
Okay, thank you. Denise?
I really think the idea of email after the meeting too for additional comments is really going to be beneficial, because an hour and a half with as many people as we have only gets a little bit of of information from feedback.
Just out of recognition for the Open Public Meetings Act, I want to remind everybody, if you're sending email, make sure you're sending it just to Lisa and myself. Don't include other members of the committee.
Okay. Okay, so next steps are, everyone is to look, if when you have a moment, to look at the incentives portion of the PowerPoint. And then if you have things that you want to weigh in on, please send those emails to Lisa and Courtney. And I think that's everything for today, at least. Is that correct?
Yes,
Anyone has
yes,
to
that's what
add?
we had prepared.
I was going to throw this out just to see, I don't know what the legalities are around it. Wondering if anyone on the committee would be interested in meeting in person. Anyone out there? Okay, so we'll just stay in a Zoom format then.
It looks like, Chair, there's a few people with
We're
their hands
raising
up.
our hands to, I think, say yes for those that wouldn't mind, but if it stays in virtual, that's fine with me. Just I miss seeing people face to face.
Yeah, it would be a little more conducive to conversation, I think, if we could meet in person, but.
We would be able to do a hybrid format, Miss Gruder, and as well as the team from Planet Geo. Planet Geo is actually on the East Coast, and then Burke Consulting is based out of King County. And so a portion, as City Council and Planning Commission, has been hybrid. We could certainly do that. If you would like to meet in person, I'd be happy to set up a meeting room, but we would still have the presentations and everything via Zoom. So if that's the direction you want to take, let me know.
Courtney, you have a lovely, lovely meeting room there at City Hall. It's begging to be used again. It's dusted off.
Okay, so it sounds to me like, would we like to do that next week or perhaps our final meeting, April 26th?
Courtney, on that date, I won't be able to be in person myself, but on the 12th I could be.
Understood. So let me check meeting room availability because some of them have been reserved already, and I will let everyone know. And again, that would be a hybrid format. So if you could not attend in person, you would not have to. I would call it somewhat of an experiment. There is certainly pros to meeting in person, but we found in the hybrid format, sometimes audio quality is not the greatest between the individual committee members. And so we might just have to take turns speaking into a microphone.
And not that it matters all that much, but I will be on a business trip next week and would not be able to attend in person. But I was thinking, I do like the idea of doing, when we actually are going to sit down and write these up and get them ready for presentation, I think that would be a wonderful opportunity for us to be in the same room if possible.
And get a photo to document this process that is gonna outlive us. So
yeah, that's a good idea, Denise.
Planting roots, no pun intended. Just kidding.
Question too is the number of meetings we have left set in stone, or if there's things that still need to be resolved or dialed in. Is there an option to have another meeting?
There is an option to have another meeting. I think that our turnaround time is somewhat set in stone. And we may also have to revise some contracts that we currently have. And so we have a week or two of flexibility built in, but the City Council has charged this group with providing the Planning Commission with a recommendation mid-May to early June. So given the time for packet turnaround times and the amount of staff time it's going to take to assemble all of your feedback and put that into a code format, middle of May would probably be cutting it pretty close for us to be able to meet our timelines, but that does give us a little bit of flexibility. I think that based off of the conversations that we've had this far and the fact that we didn't get started in February, that April 26th, which was tentative, is very likely a guarantee at this point. And then if we wanted to look at another possible meeting date in that week, or in the following week, we can explore that option depending on everybody's availability. I could try to keep it to that Tuesday schedule. And if it's just, we're coming down to the framework discussion, we can explore, meeting in person and maybe getting everyone together to finalize that depending on everybody's availability. So we advertised a set number of dates for a set time frame. And I don't want to make assumptions, but we have a little flexibility built in.
Okay, thank you.
So then, Courtney, do we want to just revisit that option of adding some additional days depending on how far we get in our next meeting?
That sounds good to me, Chair. And I can also in the interim I'll just send out a quick email and just reply directly to me with, if you'd like to meet in person, what day? Because if nobody's available next week, for example, then I won't reserve the room. And then if you're available for additional meeting days, your preferred days and times of the week for that following week after our final April 26th meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. And is there anything else that anyone would like to bring up before we move on?
I have a question. And my question is, I raised my hand because there was a little hand. I touched it on the screen, but it didn't give me results. And I touched it again. What are you doing so someone can see that you're actually trying to comment? What action do we take with these hands?
There's a little hand. So when you touch the hand button, there should be a hand on your picture. If you see it, the hand is the yellow hand up in the corner of your picture. That means your hand is raised and everyone can see that it's raised. So I don't know, you might have negated it by tapping it twice. I'm not sure, but I mean, you could practice it right now if you wanted to. You can just go and tap on the raised hand. And
I don't see a raised hand. There is no raised hand.
So if you go,
you have to hit the three dots, the more option.
Yep.
Oh, I see the raised hand now.
Yeah, and then you just tap on that. And then you should see the raised hand on your screen. Oh, did we lose you?
all of your links
Oh, I don't know. Did we lose Sean? Is she still there?
She's there on my screen, but her screen is blank.
Oh, no. Okay. She might have tapped herself out there.
Sean, can you hear us?
I hear you, yes.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
But I don't see anyone.
Oh, no.
That's the wrong raised hand.
Oh.
You turned off the lights.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry, guys, but that seems to be.
That's fine. I had one other quick question to bring up to the group, and then we can go. Does anyone want to have any desire to share phone numbers or emails or contact information?
Hey, why are you buying us again?
I didn't know if anybody would be interested in doing.
Oh, I just wanted to point out, we didn't really have a vote on this, but after the meeting, is there any potential in having a vote on spoken public comment?
I will give you
So Tikamar would like to know if anyone would like to reinstate the ability for the community to speak on these Zooms. Does anybody move for that? Okay.
I think Courtney sent out a survey that was out to the community. Is that true, Courtney? Was that sent to the whole community and is it on the city's website for feedback on this process?
Yes, and it will be more widely distributed via Facebook this week. And right now we don't have an end date for that. We're also hosting 2 tree talks. The first one is tomorrow at noon. And then we're either going to have a tree tour or an additional tree talk the first week in May.
Yeah, I did share that with several people that asked for a way to comment on the process. So maybe you can send that to the committee again and we can all be more cognizant of sharing that if you would like to have that kind of input.
Yeah. So it doesn't sound like the committee wants to have more public comment on this, on our call, Tico. So wherever you went, I think you're still on there at this time. Okay. All right, and with that, I think that's everything, unless anyone has any other
I do
questions.
see that Mr. Glassstetter has his hand raised. I don't know. If
Oh,
that's-
Micah.
Or no, okay. He put it
Oh,
down.
he.
No other hands.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all again so very much, and we look forward to chatting